Only I know that my mother-in-law killed her dog by sitting on it. What's a secret you will take to the grave but don't mind telling on the internet? I had a sweet, wonderful student who had been in foster care, but his mom worked her ass off to get him back, and she did. He had to take a very important state exam. I have no idea why I wrote city exam, and she called me and asked if he passed it. I looked at the grades and saw he did and said so. She burst into tears of joy, and that is when I saw I had read the wrong score. He had failed. So I changed his grade to passing. No one knew. That was the only time I ever did that. That could have cost me my license. The weird thing is, when my awful corrupt principal pressured me to change other students' scores so we could raise our pass rate, I refused. I never told anyone what I did for my student. He went into the military, was extremely successful there, has a great wife and kids, so I think I did the right thing. Fuck those tests. They aren't human. I used to work for the airport and so got very discounted fares for friends and family. My mom was going on a trip with her friend to Key West and they were gonna drive since flying was too expensive. I talked her into letting me handle the flying arrangements and they'd save a ton. A typical $500 plus flight turned into like $250 for both of them combined. Well, I was still kinda new at booking reservations and whatnot, and I ended up screwing up the reservation. I think I only booked it for one way or something. So the night before their flight, I rebooked it, and paid the $450 for the both of them, money I really didn't have and have since never told my mom. It was for Mother's Day, so I figured that was my gift to her. It's been nearly 10 years since. Speaking of grave, when I was a teenager, some friends and I got really stoned and walked around the town cemetery. There was a whole section of generic flat grave markers from the 1800s. I found myself trying to imagine their lives in the same town I lived so long ago. Then I saw one plate kind of sticking up and crooked and I bent down to touch it. It wasn't attached at all, and I lifted it up in my hand. Right then, my asinine stone teenage brain decided to put it in my backpack. I thought I'd somehow honor this stranger more than the shitty groundskeeper leaving it all willy-nilly in the middle of the aisle. None of my friends saw what I did. Few hours later, sober, and the guilt and panic are setting in. I hid the plate in my closet for about a year before I chucked it back over the fence one day late at night. I hope Bessie Jane Holmes doesn't mind that I kept her for a while. I still think back and shudder at the guilt of such immoral fuckery. I attempted to murder my mother. She was abusive, verbally but also physically. She'd hit you in places no one would see, or rip clumps of my hair out when Dad was on the road for work. She probably has a personality disorder. She got in my face one night when I was coming home from my second job, and I had it. My mom went through whole periods where she wouldn't work. I was killing myself every summer working 50+ hours to pay family bills in my parents' names and also get my younger sister to all of her activities. I had it. I tried to put Mom's head through a wall. She started screaming, "Oh, help, help," and I told her she could dish it out, she should also be able to take it, shoved her on the ground and kicked her repeatedly in the abdomen and thigh, while still trying to put her head through the wall with one hand. It's a plaster and lath situation, old house in New England. I really fucked her up, and it felt good to do so. She's destroyed so many people's lives and she never faces any consequences for it. No one in our family ever helped me or called the police when she would abuse me. The only one who ever helped was the dog. If the dog was awake when my mom tried to start something, she'd get between us, growl at Mom until she backed down. I had always shown restraint and never hit her until this night. But my dad did call the cops on me when I crossed that line. The cops get there, split us up to interview. I explained my side and then just blurt out, "Where were you assholes when I was 8 and she was doing that to me?" The cop was taken aback. I think he could tell I was being honest, and it was a culmination of years of shit and pain. He goes and talks to his partner. "I think this isn't an assault, I think it's a mental illness thing." Then they basically intimidated my mom and dad into agreeing with them. They wouldn't let it go until they agreed it was a medical issue, not a criminal one. So they called an ambulance and I went to the hospital as part of a diversion program. Basically, they sent me to detox for 3 days and I emerged with no record, no charges, no nothing except a script for Prozac and a recommendation for therapy, paid for by the state low-income insurance plan. Trying to kill my mom probably saved my life, honestly. Because I got myself some tools from a CBT/DBT therapist, but I'm not stupid enough to want people to know. Who would date me? How would I ever get promoted at work? Anyway, Be kind. You never know what someone's been through, and you never know what people are capable of when pushed far enough. When I was 7, my dad was dating this woman and they seemed pretty happy, but she had a son who would molest me for months in my own room and eventually lead to him raping me. If I was to have told anyone, that would break up our parents, and I didn't want my dad to be sad, so I just took it. I sharted on a New Year's party bus a few years ago. I thought it was just a fart, but it was a small shotgun blast of fluid. I stayed calm, and threw away my undies at the next bar. Luckily there was little or no shit on the inside of my jeans, and I was able to continue the night with no one aware of my poop crime. That my dad paid my mom $1,500 for full custody of my youngest sibling. Not only would this be a massive blow to my sibling, but my dad remarried quite quickly, and the new wife is the very definition of an evil stepmom. If my sibling knew that our mom gave her up for such a small sum of money and the trade-off was 5+ years of abuse, she would be destroyed. As a teenager, I had cancer multiple times and nearly died a lot. At one point, I spent several weeks in intensive care and survived despite no doctor thinking that I possibly could live. More than 20 years later, everyone I know still comments on how I survived purely on will to live. I actually spent every moment in that hospital bed in absolute agony, desperately wanting to die. When I was an awkward tween, my brothers and I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. We had been raised by my grandparents since we were little kids, and even after my dad remarried, he and my stepmom both worked graveyard shifts, so we would spend the night at my grandparents' house while my parents were at work. One day, my grandmother informed me that it was my grandfather's birthday and suggested that I wish him a happy birthday. He was downstairs in the living room sitting on the sofa, and I went up to him and gave him a big hug around the neck and said, "Happy birthday, Grandpa." It was kind of difficult to hug a person sitting down, so I ended up kneeling on the sofa between his legs rather than trying to hug him from a standing position. He was quite happy and gave me a hug back. When I pulled back from the hug, he held me in his arms and gave me a big smile. And then he put his tongue in my mouth. Sometimes when I was a little kid we would kiss other family members on the mouth, but those were chaste pecks on the lips. I could tell immediately that this was different. His tongue was on my teeth. It lasted only for a moment and I was grossed out and confused when I pulled away. At that moment my grandmother walked into the living room. I turned my head to look at her. My hands were still on my grandpa's shoulders. She seemed really happy that I had wished my grandfather a happy birthday like a good little kid. I gave him a final quick hug and scrambled out of the room. For the rest of my tween and teen years, I was always careful not to be alone in the same room with my grandfather. He passed away during my 20s, a good decade ahead of his time due to lifestyle-induced health issues, and my family chose me to speak at his funeral. I had really complicated feelings about it because I did love him. My grandma and grandpa raised me, after all. Also, my grandfather was the rock of the family, and after he passed away, the three branches, my dad and our family, plus his siblings and their families, gradually grew apart, and nothing was ever the same between us again. We don't even spend Christmas all together anymore. I've never told anyone in my family about it because I couldn't break my grandmother's heart. She survived her husband 10 years and still talks to and about him every day and visits his grave multiple times a week. So, thanks for listening to my story, Reddit. Nice to get that off my chest. So my grandfather had a hand in making one of the World Series trophies back in the day. He never got any credit, but we have photos and parts from his prototype. When I was a teen I added what I knew to Wikipedia, since why not, although I believe it's gone now, but funny story, I ended up being quoted in newspapers all over the country. Proceed to a few years later I get a call from my mom who's almost in tears of joy. She found that wiki page and was freaking out. She was so happy he finally got credit. She ended up making really fancy shadow boxes of the wiki page printed out, copies of the photos and other baseball stuff. She made one for each of her siblings. I've had to just bite my tongue every time I go over there and see this thing hanging prominently in the living room. Seems like a good time as any to tell this story. When I was a teenager my parents were divorced yet lived within walking distance of each other. I would oftentimes walk back and forth between their homes for whatever reason. I got to know a family that lived in the house on the corner of the block my mother lived on. One day as I was passing this house I noticed a wallet on the ground. I picked up and opened the wallet. I noticed the address on the ID was the house on the corner and it was the mom of the family, a very nice lady. Me being a teenager, Took all of the money out of the wallet, about $50. I then went back to the home and returned the wallet, explaining I found it down the street. The mother was very relieved and grateful. What always weighed on me is a few weeks later I passed the corner house as I often did, and the lady stopped me. She wanted to thank me for returning the wallet and handed me a $50 bill. I tried to refuse it, but she insisted. I was rewarded for stealing. While it's not a big secret, it is something I always think about for some reason. I've never really had the heart to tell anyone this story. My first car accident back in high school was not because I swerved to miss a deer like I told my dad and the police. I actually tried to pull the emergency brake and do a 180 while going 50 miles per hour downhill. Had I gone off the other side of the road, I would have gone down a 50-foot hill and into the river. That was the last time I ever tried anything like that. There just so happened to be deer tracks in the mud near the ditch where I ended up. I avoided a ticket and my dad paid to fix my car. I have never told him the truth in the 15+ years since. My dad cheated on my mom and invited the person over when I was 9. She was a severely overweight woman and my dad is also quite overweight. My parents were fighting but trying to work things out. They slept in separate rooms at this point. Earlier that day I had jumped on his bed and broke the board supporting it on the bed frame. I wasn't allowed to do this and always got in trouble for this reason. My mom smelled the fact that my dad had company because she smoked in my house. She asked if I jumped on the bed. I said no. I feared I'd get in trouble. I was surprised there was no follow-up trying to prove my guilt. Years later I remember why she asked and realized my lie basically incriminated him to fucking her. I'm sure he did, but that got him kicked out of my house. I'm a guy. When I was around 9 to 10 I had a friend, also guy, who pushed me up against the wall and started jacking me off. He started doing this frequently and made me masturbate in front of him with one of my parents' personal massagers. I tried to tell on him one time but went back on it really quickly. I think my mom knew what was going on though. Felt a bit like Stockholm because he was one of my only friends back then and I was really scared and confused. Then another friend started dry humping me at a sleepover one time. Being sexualized so early on in life really fucked me up. I was raped with an implement in the youth room of my childhood church by my two best friends at the time. We were basically alone in the building at the time. One did it, and the other held me down. They thought it was a joke, funny, even once I started screaming. One of them had a moment of clarity and I suppose realized that what they were doing was wrong, and made the other person stop, and they sat there with me for a few minutes until I'd calmed down. Once I regained myself enough to stand, I racked one of them between the legs with a pool cue. Their parents were waiting in the parking lot, and they were going to call the cops on me until my friend confessed what they'd done to their parents. I was pressured into silence by the pastor at the parents' behest. I've told people, so I guess it's not technically a secret, but nobody's believed me because I'm a big guy, and always have been. The last person I tried to talk to about it actually smacked me in the face, so I guess I'll be dying with this one. Once when I was 13 I went a week and a half without pooping. I was on a camping trip and something must have happened with the drinking water, my digestion. Took laxatives, nothing worked. My stomach was killing me but nothing would come out. Then one evening after dinner, I felt it coming. I knew this was it. I bolted for the bathhouse, mentally preparing for the epic event. When I finally waddled in, the stalls were all occupied. At this point I'm freaking out. I'm literally going to shit my pants and in the woods with no means of cleaning. I waddle to the private shower attached to the bathrooms and my desperate mind starts solving problems like I'm Bradley Cooper in Limitless. Initially I think to just shit on the shower drain and waffle stomp it through, but I was not going to be that guy who ruined the nicest shower in the woods for everyone. Like a bolt of lightning I knew what I had to do. So I pooped in the only piece of clothing I could spare, my sock. Obviously my stomach was doing better now and I was hugely relieved. I brought the poop sock to the dumpster nearby and one of my friends saw me on the way. Before I could dispose of the poop sock he strikes up a conversation and starts asking questions about what I'm doing. Internally I'm panicking. The best excuse I could come up with was that I found a sock in the shower stuffed with mud, so I thought it best to throw it away. My friend affirms how good of a guy the first am for doing that. I throw the poop sock into the dumpster and my problems are finally over. Mud in a sock is a ridiculous story, but there's absolutely no way he could have guessed that the real situation was much, much more bizarre. I've never told a soul about this until now. Never will again. A girl I knew for 3 years told me she gets raped by her half-brother every week. She doesn't like it and doesn't want to tell her mom. Since her mom has been married 6 times and she says that she is very happy with her current husband. She doesn't want to ruin her mom's relationship. So she just keeps going on with it against her will. She sweared on her life that I'm the only one who knows about this. And she begs me not to tell anyone. And the problem is that if I want to and if it gets exposed, she will immediately know it's me. You know those stories about girls in the 70s who went to live with an aunt for a year during high school? I did that in 2008. I was a very naive teenager with irregular periods, and my friend thought it would be absolutely hilarious to buy those cheap pregnancy tests at Walmart and see what happened. We laughed the whole time, until one of them was positive. We couldn't remember which was which, so we got 2 more and turns out it was mine. That was when it dawned on me that I had had sex. My school did not offer any kind of sex education, and my parents were useless in that regard. I panicked and swore my friend to secrecy. I basically put it out of my mind until my clothes didn't fit anymore. I was always close with my older cousin and we were talking on the phone one night when she asked how school was going and I just dumped all of it on her. She came up with the perfect plan. It was already April and when I'd finally gotten the courage to go to Planned Parenthood they'd told me I was due in August. So my cousin called my mom saying there was this amazing summer music program in her town that I just had to attend, and that I could stay with her the whole time. My mom thought it was great and the day after school ended I got on a plane to San Francisco. I stayed with my cousin, she went to all of my appointments with me, and she helped me find a social worker and eventually my daughter's parents. When I arrived back home before my junior year of high school started, my mom asked me how my summer was without really caring and then remarked that I must have lost a few pounds. My cousin died in 2012 in a car accident, and no one else knew apart from that one friend, the doctors I saw in Oakland, and the people involved in the adoption. I get a photo and a letter about the child once a year, and I send money for her college and a card for her birthday every year. When she turns 16, her parents are allowed to give her the cards if she wants them, but they are not permitted to pass any contact information along. I have no interest in meeting her or getting to know her personally. I know she's safe and comfortable and that's all I want. I will die before I tell anyone about her, and if my friend were to spill the beans I would deny it.